constitutions of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. The 1979 Constitution states that Nigeria, quote, shall promote African unity as well as total political, economic, social, and cultural liberation of Africans, unquote. This policy manifests in the 1999 Constitution as follows. 1. Promotion and protection of the national interest. 2. Promotion of African integration and support for African unity. 3. Promotion of international cooperation for the consolidation of universal peace and mutual respect among all nations and elimination of discrimination in all its manifestations. Respect for international law and treaty obligations, as well as the seeking of settlement of international disputes by the negotiation, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, and adjudication. And finally, promotion of a just world economic order. To comprehend the nature of these core values, as well as Nigeria's external behavior, it is necessary to understand the concentric circles framework, quote and unquote, the concentric circles framework, which has been analytically used to examine Nigerian foreign policy. This geographically based model was originally devised to understand Nigeria's defense policy. It has now been expanded to include the political and economic dimensions of foreign policy. In explaining the utility of the model, Margaret Vaught, who's a professor still at the UN, working at the UN too, writes, and I quote, that Nigeria cannot take on itself the responsibility of guaranteeing African security without first ensuring its own territorial boundaries with the states contiguous to it of the West African sub-region, and then one can operate with confidence at the regional, that is African continent level, unquote, end quote. This model divides Nigerian foreign policy goals in Africa into 3 geographical regions: the core, 2, the West African sub-region, and finally the rest of Africa. This model has been modified by CMB Utete, who is an author, some of you might be familiar with him, on Africa, Utete. His model places the 4 states bordering Nigeria into the second category, or sub-regional area, rather than in the core area. The core category refers to the security and preservation of Nigerian territorial integrity and independence. It involves foreign policy goals related to the protection and preservation of Nigeria and Nigerians. The second category includes the states in Nigeria's perceived sub-region, namely West Africa. The third category includes the African states not listed under the sub-regional issues. Beside this category, Nigeria has global commitment, which further widens its role beyond West Africa and Africa. Within these explanatory schemes, Nigeria's role in Africa and in the world, buoyed, supported by a strong domestic environment, including a vibrant economy, consensus on national goals, good governance, internal peace and stability, etc., is understood to consist of the following. Sub-regional dimension. At the sub-regional level, Nigeria's role has been to assure a politically and economically stable West Africa. This concern is reflected in the country's commitment to the policies of status quo and good neighborliness. It is also seen in Nigeria's interest in the creation by the Treaty of Lagos 1975 and development of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. You know, Lagos was the former political capital of Nigeria up to 1989, when we moved to the center part of Nigeria, which is now called Abuja, the political capital. Lagos remains the commercial capital and one of the biggest cities in the world today. Lagos estimated at about 15 million population. Although ECOWAS constitutes an integral part of the African policy, it is of greater concern to Nigeria because most countries in the sub-region share common borders with Nigeria. In addition, most of the countries are heavily dependent on extra-African powers for their military, political, and economic survival. That is ending now. The founding 2 years ago of Co-Prosperity Zone, COPAS, among the immediate neighbors of Nigeria to the west, Benin, Togo, and Ghana, was aimed at fast-tracking the integration of West Africa through ECOWAS. Therefore, Nigeria's concept of threat perception is appropriately linked to the defense of the country's borders because the invasion of a nation's territory usually begins with the violation of its frontier by the enemy. It is in this context that one must view Nigeria's bilateral and multilateral defense arrangement in the sub-region. The climax of Nigeria's defense strategy in the sub-region was signing the Defense Protocol in May 1981. Under this defense arrangement, Nigeria committed herself to combating any form of armed aggression within the sub-region. It is also in this context that Nigeria's involvement in the ECOMOG interventions in Liberia, which is ECOWAS intervention forces, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, and Guinea-Bissau could be understood. Nigeria is also interested in an economically prosperous West Africa. A vibrant and growing Nigerian economy will act as a strong growth pole for West and even Central Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, as a region, cannot succeed in reducing poverty, and it cannot reach the Millennium Development Goal of 2015 unless Nigeria, with 1/5 of the African population, succeed in its own economic development. This is logic. Still, at the regional level, Nigeria is supporting peace-building activities in several post-conflict countries, including Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, Cote d'Ivoire, and Liberia. Oil has been sold to most of these countries on concessional basis, while work on the West African gas pipeline project linking Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ghana in the first instance is progressing. Also, Nigeria initiated the establishment of the Gulf of Guinea Commission as a framework of cooperation among Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Sao Tome and Principe, Congo-Brazzaville, Gabon, and Angola. This cooperative framework, formally established on 25th of August 2006 in Libreville, Gabon, has its headquarters in Luanda, Angola. It removes potential sources of conflict between these countries and strengthens trust and confidence among them. This is an attempt also to protect the resources of that area. Of course, you know, apart from the Middle East, the Gulf of Guinea probably has the largest reserve of oil that supplies the United States. Continental dimension. Africa has remained the centerpiece of Nigeria's foreign policy. Nigeria's major concerns on the continent include promotion of peace, prosperity, stability, and development, promotion of political goodwill and understanding among African countries despite cultural, linguistic, and economic barriers, the discouragement of international intervention on the continent, the promotion of rapid socio-economic development of Africa through regional integration, the strengthening of sub-regional economic institutions, and the speedy decolonization of the continent. To pursue these goals, Nigeria supported decolonization efforts on the continent, especially in the Southern African sub-region, and was recognized as a frontline state. Because, you know, in the days of apartheid South Africa, the countries that were contiguous to South Africa were the frontline states that bore the brunt of anti-apartheid drive. But Nigeria was so capital and so important in the drive against apartheid that Nigeria was given the title of a frontline state. Nigeria participated actively in the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in 1963, and in the birth of the African Union now, 2001. Nigeria is currently a member of the AU's Peace and Security Council, which tackles threats to regional security. Nigeria has taken initiatives on conflict resolution on the continent, including Chad, 1981. That's where I started my diplomatic career, where I was able to interpret in 1981 November, during what we call the Chadian Conference. Of course, there was a time when there were two chargés d'affaires emerging for Chad. And I was a third secretary, I remember, and they called me in the protocol department and said, well, you have two chargés d'affaires claiming to represent one nation. So I turned to my boss, I said, sir, how do I deal with this? He said, you are a diplomat. I said, but I'm not yet trained. He said, you are a diplomat. Go and deal with it. How I dealt with it, I will tell you next time. Development, when there was an overthrow of the government of Sao Tome and Principe, and the president ran to Nigeria, and the president of Nigeria put him on his aircraft, consulted some people, neighboring country, and landed in a country where a general was already in power and told him this coup is over. And that was the end of that coup, because the African Union had decided that anybody that comes to power through the barrel of the gun who was not democratically elected will not sit with African heads of state. And that has been enforced. Nigeria led the effort to ensure the restoration to power or president of South